Chapter 1. The Referral. The waiting room of Heart Integrative Therapy had two sections. The left side had large windows, natural light, and a cheerful display of succulents on the sill. The right side had blackout curtains, cooler air conditioning, and a discreet sign that read, UV Filtered Zone, Vampire Accessible. Augustus Bellamy, King of the Ashworth Court, bearer of the Compact Seal, and the longest-serving sovereign in the Western judiciary of the Nocturne Accord, sat on the right side in a chair designed for someone considerably smaller. He held a referral slip in both hands, the way one holds a summons. "She's running 7 minutes late," he said. Clement, his chief advisor, did not look up from the small leather notebook he'd been writing in since the car. "She is a medical professional, my lord, not a courtier. She does not operate on your schedule." "I operate on everyone's schedule. That is the function of a schedule." Clement made a note. Augustus could not see what it said, but he suspected it was unflattering. The door to the treatment room opened, and a woman stepped out. She was in her early 30s, dark hair pulled back in a practical knot, wearing a simple gray athletic top and black leggings. She had a clipboard and an expression that suggested she'd already had a long day and it was 10 in the morning. "Augustus Bellamy?" she said, reading from the clipboard. He stood. The full height of him, 6'2", pale, composed, impeccably dressed in a charcoal suit that had no business being in a physical therapy clinic, unfolded from the waiting room chair. "I am Augustus Bellamy," he confirmed, as if there might be confusion. She looked at him. She looked at the suit. She looked at the referral slip he was holding with both hands like a royal decree. "Sylvie Hart," she said. "Come on back." She did not bow. She did not use his title. She turned and walked into the treatment room, and Augustus followed, leaving Clement in the waiting room. "Your physician's referral says, progressive movement irregularities, onset approximately 6 months," she said, scanning the paperwork as she walked. "Stiffness in the hips, reduced rotation in the thoracic spine, and," she paused, "a microtremor in the right hand. Is that accurate?" "Dr. Vance is thorough," Augustus said. "Dr. Vance is a vampire physician," Sylvie said, setting the clipboard on a counter and turning to face him. "Which means he's excellent at blood panels and terrible at biomechanics. That's why you're here." He blinked. "You are direct." "I'm a physical therapist. I don't have 400 years to be indirect." She gestured to the center of the room, where a treatment table and a wide floor mat occupied the space. "Have you ever had body work done? PT, sports rehab, movement assessment?" "I was assessed by a military physician in 1547, he offered. She stared at him. "We've made some advances since then." "I should hope so. His primary diagnostic tool was a hot poker." "Great. No hot pokers today. I need you in athletic clothing for the assessment. There's a changing room behind that curtain." She paused, looking at his suit. "You did bring athletic clothing?" He had not. The possibility that a king would need to change clothes at a medical appointment had not occurred to him. "I did not anticipate the need." She opened a drawer, pulled out a plain black t-shirt and a pair of simple cotton shorts, and held them out to him. "I keep spares. You'd be surprised how many of your lot show up in 3-piece suits." He took the clothes with the careful dignity of a man accepting a foreign treaty document. "My lot?" "Vampires over 300. You all dress like you're attending your own funeral." She waved toward the curtain. "Go change, and take off the signet ring. I need to see your hands without jewelry." He looked down at the Ashworth signet, a heavy silver band he had worn for 4 centuries. He had not removed it in living memory, or unliving memory. "The ring stays," he said. "The ring comes off. I need to assess your grip strength and finger dexterity without metal on the joints." He met her gaze. She met his without flinching. There was no challenge in it, no defiance, just the settled certainty of someone who knew her job. He removed the ring. His hand felt naked. "Thank you," she said, and the two words were entirely professional and entirely sufficient. She did not know what the ring meant. She did not need to. The assessment was the most humiliating 45 minutes of his existence since the siege of Vienna. "Walk across the room for me," Sylvie said, clipboard in hand. "Normal pace, don't think about it." He walked. He thought about it. He had been thinking about walking for approximately 0 seconds in the previous 5 centuries, and now it was all he could think about. Again, faster this time. He walked faster. "Your left hip drops 2 degrees on every step. You're compensating with your right knee. How long has that been happening?" "I was not aware it had." "That's because you're very good at compensating. Squat for me." He squatted. It was adequate. "Now lunge, left leg forward." He lunged. It was less adequate. "Touch your toes." He reached for his toes. His fingers stopped at approximately mid-shin. He stared at the gap between his hands and his feet with the quiet devastation of a man who had just discovered a personal failing of historic proportions. "That's fine," she said. "Most vampires your age—" "I can do it." He reached further. His hamstrings made their position on the matter very clear. He stopped. "It's fine. Now balance on one leg, right leg." He balanced. He held it for 3 seconds, which he considered respectable. "Left leg." He shifted his weight. His left leg, the one with the compromised hip, took the load and immediately informed him that it would not be doing so for any sustained period. He wobbled. He corrected. He wobbled again. He put his right foot down with a thud. "How long have you been king?" she asked. 463 years. "And in those 463 years, has anyone ever told you your left hip was stiff?" He considered this. "No one has commented on my hips." "That's because you're a king and everyone's afraid of you." She circled him slowly, studying his posture. "Stand still for me. Don't move." He stood still. He was extremely good at standing still. He had once stood motionless in a council chamber for 6 hours to prove a point about patience to a rival house. "Your right hand," she said after a moment. "Make a fist." He did. The tremor was there, a fine, barely perceptible vibration. "Now open. Spread your fingers." He opened his hand. The tremor increased. "Has Vance addressed the tremor?" He described it as age-appropriate degeneration. "It's not." She looked up from her clipboard. "The tremor pattern isn't consistent with standard vampire aging. Aging is symmetrical and predictable. This," she tapped her pen against the chart, "this is unilateral, progressive, and it's presenting alongside the hip restriction in a combination I haven't seen in 7 years of practice." "What does that mean?" "It means I want to run a full movement screening, about an hour. Some of it involves yoga-based assessment poses." "Yoga," he repeated, the word sitting in his mouth like something he'd picked up off the floor. "It's a highly effective diagnostic framework for identifying movement pattern dysfunction. I use it with all my clients." "You use a mortal exercise practice on vampire clients." "I use biomechanical assessment on bodies that move." "Yours moves. Badly, but it moves." She set down her clipboard. "Do you want answers, or do you want to go back to Vance and his blood panels?" "Proceed," he said. "Good. Let's start with downward-facing dog." "I do not know what that is." "You will." He did not, in fact, know what it was. What it was, apparently, was a position designed to humiliate creatures who had spent 5 centuries standing upright with perfect posture. "Hands flat, hips up, heels toward the floor," Sylvie instructed. He attempted this. The result was a shape that bore no resemblance to the demonstration she had provided. Your heels are about 8 inches from the floor, she observed. I am aware. That's unusual for a vampire your age. You should have more flexibility than this, not less. She knelt beside him, placed one hand on his lower back. Her hand was warm, shockingly warm. The temperature difference, her living heat against his cool skin through the thin cotton t-shirt, was so pronounced he went still. Breathe, she said. I don't need to breathe. I know, do it anyway. It helps me read your muscle response. He performed the action of breathing. She pressed gently on his sacrum, and something in his lower back released with a sensation so unexpected he made a sound. There, she said. Feel that? That's your hip flexor group letting go. It's been in spasm. For a while, based on the adhesion. Is that significant? For a vampire, yes. Your musculature should self-regulate. Sustained spasm means something's interfering with the process. She stood, brushed off her knees. Next pose, Warrior 2. He knew this one only because the name suggested combat. He assumed a wide stance, one arm forward, one arm back. Your back foot, she said, parallel to the short edge of the mat. He adjusted. She adjusted his adjustment. Her hands were firm and professional on his ankle, rotating it precisely. He catalogued the contact, the pressure of her thumb against his Achilles tendon, the warmth radiating through his sock. You're staring at the wall, she said. You told me to find a focal point. I told you to gaze over your front fingertips. The wall is behind you. He was gazing at the wall because the wall was the direction his body had decided to face. His spatial processing, usually flawless, appeared to have abandoned him. I will adjust, he said, with the gravity of a man revising a military strategy. She made a note on her clipboard. He could not see what it said. He suspected, again, it was unflattering. By the end of the screening, he had attempted 11 poses. He had completed 3 of them in anything approaching the correct form. He had produced 2 involuntary sounds, undignified, 1 moment of total loss of balance, catastrophic, and a sustained period of lying face down on the mat during what she called child's pose that he would have found meditative if he hadn't been so aware of her studying his spine. All right, she said, when he had finally returned to standing. I have enough for a baseline. And your assessment? She set down her clipboard and looked at him. On a scale of 1 to 10, your downward dog is a 2. Your warrior 2 is a 4. Your balance is a 1.5, and I'm being generous because you didn't actually fall. You use a numerical scale. For everything. It's the only honest feedback system. She tilted her head. You disagree? On the contrary, I have used a numerical assessment system for 463 years. Every diplomatic encounter, every treaty negotiation, every court proceeding. Rated on a scale of 1 to 10. You rate diplomatic encounters. I rate everything. He said this with complete sincerity. The last council session was a 4. The wine at the Beaumont reception was a 7. This assessment, he paused, considering, an 8. She blinked. You're giving my assessment an 8? You spent 45 minutes failing at yoga. The assessment itself was rigorous, thorough, and conducted with admirable directness. The subject matter was humiliating, but the methodology was an 8. She stared at him, then she laughed. A real laugh, sudden and bright, and it did something to the room. It did something to him. Okay, she said, fighting the smile. I'm going to see you twice a week, Tuesdays and Thursdays. The sessions will give me longitudinal data to track whether the patterns are progressing, stabilizing, or responding to intervention. Twice a week, he repeated. Is that a problem? I will make the time. Good. One more thing. She stepped toward him, not a clinical step, but a corrective one. She placed 2 fingers on his left shoulder and pressed it down a full inch. You hold tension here. Both shoulders, but the left is worse. You're carrying them like epaulets. They are not. They're in your ears, Augustus. Drop them. He dropped them. The release was immediate and undignified. Better. She handed him his signet ring. Same time Thursday? He slid the ring on. Then he looked at her posture, her stance, the way she held her weight. Your right hip is externally rotated, he said. She froze. Excuse me? Approximately 4 degrees. You compensate by shifting weight to your left foot during extended standing. I noticed during the screening. She looked down at her own feet. She was, in fact, standing with her weight on her left foot. How did you're a patient. You're not supposed to assess me. I rate everything, he said. Your posture is a 7. She opened her mouth, closed it, narrowed her eyes. Thursday, she said, and my posture is an 8. 7. We'll discuss it. He walked back to the waiting room where Clement was still writing in his notebook. The advisor looked up, studied his king's face, and a subtle shift of interest crossed his features. Well? Clement asked. She told me my hips are stiff. Clement's pen paused. Your Majesty, your hips have been stiff since the Reformation. Apparently that's a medical problem and not a stylistic choice. Augustus collected his suit jacket from the chair. We will be returning Thursday. Thursday, Clement repeated. He opened his notebook to a fresh page and wrote a header Augustus couldn't see. And how was the practitioner? Direct, Augustus said. She made me remove the signet ring. Clement's eyebrows rose approximately 1 millimeter, for Clement, the equivalent of falling out of his chair. You removed it? She required it for the assessment. You have refused to remove that ring for popes, Your Majesty. Augustus straightened his jacket. She is not a pope. She is a physical therapist. She had a valid clinical reason. Clement wrote something in his notebook. Augustus did not ask what. They walked to the car in silence. Augustus could still feel the precise points where her hands had been on his back. 2 warm impressions on his cold skin, like fingerprints left on a window pane in winter. Chapter 2. The Sessions. By the 3rd week, Clement had titled the new section of his notebook, Field Notes on a King's Rehabilitation. He read aloud to no one in particular, while Augustus stretched his hip flexors on a mat in the residence's east wing. Session 6. Subject has developed a proprietary vocabulary for the treatment. Downward dog is now the undignified inversion. Warrior 2 is the formation. Subject refuses to learn the Sanskrit terminology on principle. It is not on principle, Augustus said from the floor, his forehead pressed to his knee. I am 500 years old. I have learned 19 languages. I am drawing a line. A line at Sanskrit? A line at being told to find my ujjayi breath by a woman who can't be more than 32. 31, Clement corrected. I checked. Augustus lifted his head. Why? Professional due diligence. She holds a doctorate in biomechanical rehabilitation from King's College London. She completed a postdoctoral fellowship in non-human physiology, and she has published 4 peer-reviewed papers on vampire musculoskeletal degeneration. Clement turned a page. She also has a cat named Gerald who has his own social media account. Why do you know about the cat? The cat has 12,000 followers, my lord. It seemed relevant. The sessions had settled into a rhythm. Tuesdays and Thursdays, 10 in the morning. Sylvie ran him through sequences that she adapted each week based on what she observed. He followed her instructions with an earnestness that she had, on 2 occasions, described as intense. You don't have to salute the mat before you step on it, she'd said during session 4. I am not saluting. I am acknowledging. It's a rubber mat, Augustus, not a dignitary. All things deserve acknowledgement. He stepped onto the mat with solemn precision. What is the sequence today? We're working on your thoracic rotation. Lie on your side. He lowered himself to the mat the way a head of state descends from a podium, with full ceremony and zero haste. Have you been doing the home exercises I assigned? I have completed them daily. Clement timed me. You had your advisor time your stretching? He volunteered. He said it was anthropologically significant. Augustus paused. I do not know what he meant by that. I do, Sylvie muttered. Okay, knees stacked, top arm reaches overhead. I have a question. About the exercise? About the nomenclature. You called the previous sequence cat-cow. I have done it. I performed it well. But I would like to understand, why is it named for two animals when the movement resembles neither? It's just a name, Augustus. Names carry weight. In my court, the naming of a thing defines its function. If you call the diplomatic agreement cat-cow, there would be significant confusion. She pressed her hand against his shoulder blade to guide the rotation. Your court must be a real blast at parties. We do not have parties. We have assemblies. Do the assemblies have snacks? They have blood service. So, vampire snacks. He considered this for a genuine moment. I suppose that is accurate. She laughed. He did not understand why, but the sound of it settled into a quiet place in his chest and stayed there. After the session, while she made notes, he noticed a small, dying plant on the windowsill. It was brown at the edges and listing to the left like a ship taking on water. Your ficus is struggling, he observed. I know. She didn't look up. I've been talking to it. It hasn't helped. You talk to it? Don't judge me. I tell it about my day. I give it pep talks. Yesterday I told it its new growth looked very promising, which was a lie, but I believe in positive reinforcement. He stared at the ficus. Then, very quietly, I talked to my signet ring. She looked up. You what? When I remove it for our sessions, I place it on the counter and I say, he paused, as if considering whether this information was safe to share with another living being. I will return shortly. You tell your ring you'll be right back? It has been on my hand for 400 years. It seems discourteous to leave without acknowledgement. She set down her pen. She looked at him, 6'2", pale, composed, dead serious about the etiquette of jewelry communication. Augustus. Yes? That is the weirdest thing a client has ever told me. And I once had a 300-year-old who sang to his kneecaps. I do not sing to my ring. I merely inform it. What score would you give the ring conversation? He considered. As a conversation, a 6. As a revelation of personal vulnerability, an 8. I'm giving it a 10. That's the best thing I've heard all week. By session 5, the scoring had become a language. Cat-cow, she announced. What score did I achieve last time? 5. I have practiced. I would like a reassessment. She watched him perform the sequence. His spine articulated with noticeably more fluidity. His breath timing had improved. She tilted her head. 6.5. You use decimals? When merited. I see. He came out of the pose. And the overall session? We haven't finished the session. I am requesting a preliminary score. You don't get preliminary scores. You get a score at the end. That's how scores work. In diplomatic assessment, interim scoring is standard practice. It allows for course correction. You are not conducting diplomacy. You are doing yoga. I am always conducting diplomacy, he said, with an earnestness that made her press her lips together very hard. She found the crossbow scar that day. Her hands were pressing into the fascial adhesion along his ribcage, methodical and warm, when she stopped. "There's a mass here," she said. "Scar tissue. Deep." She traced the edge of it with her thumb. "This isn't muscular. Something penetrated the chest wall." "A crossbow bolt, 1723. That'll do it." She pressed harder, something released. He made a sound, involuntary, undignified, and witnessed. "There," she said, as if the sound hadn't happened. "That adhesion has been pulling your seventh rib into internal rotation for 300 years. No one has ever found it. No vampire physician would think to look in soft tissue. They check bone and blood. I check the system." She moved around to his other side, her hands finding the compensatory pattern on his left. "Your body sealed the wound, but it never resolved the compensation. You've been moving around this injury for 3 centuries. Your entire left side has been adapting to it." Her hand was on his bare skin now. She'd asked him to remove the t-shirt for the ribcage work. Her palm flat against his back, fingers spread. The temperature contrast was extraordinary. Her warmth felt like a brand against his cold skin. He could feel her pulse through her fingertips, steady, quick, alive. He went still. Not the yoga stillness she was teaching him, the other kind. "Augustus?" "Yes." "You stopped breathing." "I don't need to breathe." "You were breathing a minute ago. You stopped when I touched the scar." He was quiet. She was right. He had stopped the mimicry the instant her hand landed on the old wound, a place no one had touched since the bolt that made it. The contact had short-circuited something in him that wasn't muscular. "Continue the treatment," he said. She did, but she noticed, and he knew she noticed, and neither of them said anything about the way his hands had gone completely still, not resting, not relaxed, but the predator still that meant something had made a decision. She cleared her throat. "Session score?" 9, he said, and his voice was lower than usual. "It's an 8. You lost a point for the breathing thing." "I dispute the deduction." "Noted. Lie on your back." He lay down. She placed one hand on his shoulder to ground it and guided his knees into a twist. Her face was close to his. He could count her eyelashes. He catalogued this fact and immediately wished he hadn't, because now he knew the number and would never be able to unknow it. "You're doing the staring thing again," she said, not looking at him. "I am not staring. I am observing." "What's the difference?" Staring implies a lack of purpose. Observation is systematic. "And what are you systematically observing?" He should have said something clinical, something about the ceiling, or the treatment room, or the therapeutic value of supine twists. Instead, very precisely, very honestly, "The way your jaw tightens slightly when you're concentrating." She went still. Not predator still, human still. The kind where someone has heard something they weren't expecting and needs a moment to decide what to do with it. "That's a clinical observation?" she asked, her voice carefully neutral. "No," he said. "That one was not clinical." She held the twist for 3 more seconds. Then she released it, stepped back, and picked up her clipboard with slightly more force than was necessary. "Other side," she said, "and stop observing my jaw." He did not stop. Session 6. The posture war escalated. She corrected his shoulders 3 times during the warm-up. After the 3rd correction, he stood behind her as she demonstrated a sequence and placed 2 fingers on her right shoulder blade. "You are 4 millimeters anterior," he said. She spun around. "Did you just adjust my posture?" "Your scapula was protracted. I was concerned for your thoracic health." "I am the physical therapist in this room. And I have been maintaining court posture since the 15th century. We have different areas of expertise. Your expertise is in standing very still and looking intimidating. My expertise is in the actual mechanics of how bodies work. And yet, your right scapula was protracted. She narrowed her eyes. She reached up and pressed his left shoulder down, firmly, 2 inches. Your turn, she said. He reached out and adjusted her chin, tilting it up by a fraction of a degree. His fingertip on the underside of her jaw, cold against warm. One point of contact that sent something electric through both of them. There, he said. Neutral cervical alignment. She didn't step back. He didn't remove his hand. The moment lasted 2 seconds that felt like 2 centuries. 7, she whispered. What? The posture correction. 7 out of 10. Good technique. Inappropriate setting. He withdrew his hand. I would rate it a 9. You would? The 2-point discrepancy is noted. I will appeal. There is no appeals process. I will create one. She turned back to her clipboard. He could see the pulse in her throat, faster than clinical baseline. He said nothing. She said nothing. The room was very quiet and very warm and very small. Why did you choose this specialty, he asked, because it was safer than anything else he could think to say. She paused in her note-taking. Vampire biomechanics? You could work with humans. The professional risk would be considerably lower. The professional interest is considerably higher. She set down her pen. Human bodies degrade in predictable ways. Vampire bodies don't. You're a puzzle. Every single one of you is a different puzzle because you all have different histories, different injuries, different centuries of accumulated compensation. I've been doing this for 7 years and I've never been bored. And the danger? What danger? You work with predators, Sylvie, daily. You put your hands on creatures who feed on your species. She looked at him steadily. Augustus, I've had my hands on your ribcage for 40 minutes. If you were going to eat me, you'd have done it by now. That is not, he stopped, recalibrated. The earnestness in his voice was absolute. I would not eat you. I want to be clear about that. The thought has not occurred to me. Good to know. It is occurring to me now only because you raised it. I am retroactively not having the thought. She bit her lip. He could see she was fighting something, the corner of her mouth, the brightness in her eyes. Augustus, are you reassuring me or reassuring yourself? I am establishing a factual baseline. The factual baseline is that you're my patient, I'm your PT, and we're both professionals. Agreed. A pause. You are very warm. She looked at him. Your hands, he clarified quickly. During treatment, the temperature differential is significant. I notice it in a clinical capacity. In a clinical capacity. Yes. Noted. She picked up a resistance band. Now, let's talk about your shoulder. And Augustus? Yes? Stop cataloging my body temperature. It's weird. I will stop. He did not stop. The sessions continued. She noticed more things. Your tremor is worse this week, she said during session 8, holding his right hand in both of hers, watching his fingers. I am aware. Has Dr. Vance adjusted anything? Blood supply, supplements? He has not mentioned a need for adjustment. She frowned. The frown was diagnostic. Everything she did was diagnostic. He was beginning to realize that she never stopped assessing. The hip restriction is responding to treatment, she said, releasing his hand and writing. Your thoracic rotation has improved significantly, but the tremor isn't following the same trajectory. It's worsening on a different timeline than everything else. Meaning? Meaning whatever's causing the tremor might not be the same thing that's causing the hip issue. She looked up. I want to chart it. Tremor severity, session by session, alongside your blood intake schedule. Can you get me your feeding log? My feeding log. When you eat, what you eat, how much. It's standard practice. I ask all my vampire clients. She paused. Unless the king's blood supply is classified? It is not classified. It is merely, he searched for the word, private. Augustus, I've had my thumb in your psoas. We're past private. He felt something happen in his face that he could not control. Later, Clement would describe it as, the closest I have ever seen your majesty come to an expression. I will have the log sent to you, he said. Thank you. She reached for a resistance band. Now, let's talk about your shoulder. He watched her set up the next exercise, her movements quick and sure, and he felt it again. The shift in his chest that had started during the first assessment. A loosening. Not muscular, structural. Something load-bearing inside him was moving, and he didn't know if it was being fixed or being broken. Sylvie, he said. She looked up. You said vampire bodies are puzzles. I did. Am I a particularly difficult one? She considered this. You're the most interesting one I've worked with. You have 4 centuries of unresolved compensation, a crossbow scar from the 1720s, and a tremor that doesn't match any degeneration profile I've seen. She tilted her head. Why do you ask? I wanted to know if I was progressing adequately. You can hold Warrior 2 for 90 seconds now. 2 weeks ago, it was 30. Is that good? For a 500-year-old vampire who walks like his pelvis was installed sideways, it's excellent. He nodded, a single formal inclination. Excellent, he repeated, and the word sat differently in his mouth when she had given it to him. In the car afterward, Clement opened his notebook. Session 8, he narrated. Subject requested confirmation that his progress was adequate. Upon receiving it, subject was silent for the remainder of the appointment. The silence was of a qualitatively different nature than previous silences. I am noting this for the record. Clement. Yes, my lord? What are you writing? Field observations, Clement said serenely. For posterity. Chapter 3. The Pattern. Session 12 started wrong. Warrior 2, Sylvie said. Augustus moved into the pose, the one he'd been calling the formation until Session 9, when she'd threatened to dock a full point from his score. Left foot forward, arms extended, hips square. He held it. How does that feel? She asked. Adequate. Your left knee is shaking. He looked down. It was. A fine vibration, visible through the fabric of his workout pants. Last week, he'd held this pose for 90 seconds without a tremor. Today, at 40 seconds, his knee was betraying him. Tree pose, she said. He shifted his weight to his right leg, placed his left foot against his calf, held it for 5 seconds. 6, 7. On 8, his left hip seized and he put his foot down. That's worse than last Thursday, she said. She wasn't asking. I have been practicing. I know, that's what concerns me. She wrote something on her clipboard. Downward dog. He moved into it. The pose had been a 6.5 last week. Today, his right hand tremor was visible against the mat, a fine vibration that made his fingers dance on the rubber. Come out of that, she said. Sit down. He sat on the mat, cross-legged, and watched her walk to the wall. She'd taped a printout there, a graph with 3 lines. Not 2, 3. One for his tremor severity, one for his blood intake timing, and a third, in green, that he hadn't seen before. What is the green line? He asked. Your pose scores, session by session. Warrior 2 hold time, tree pose balance duration, downward dog stability rating. She pointed. See the pattern? He saw it. The green line, his yoga performance, declined on the same cycle as the tremor spikes. Both correlated with the blue line, his feeding schedule. Your body is telling me something in the yoga that it isn't telling me on the treatment table, she said. The poses are load-bearing. They require integrated neuromuscular coordination. When the system is compromised, the poses degrade first, before the tremor gets worse, before the hip locks up. The yoga is the early warning system. You are saying my downward dog is a diagnostic tool. I'm saying your downward dog dropped from a 6.5 to a 4 in 1 week, and that drop corresponds exactly to the 48 hours after your last evening feed. She tapped the graph. Something is in the blood, Augustus. He stared at the graph. 3 lines correlating. His body's own score declining. Explain, he said. Your baseline tremor after a 24-hour fast, when you haven't consumed anything from the quart stores, is here, she pointed. Minimal. Your pose scores are highest on fast days. But within 12 hours of consuming from the stores, everything drops. Tremor spikes. Pose quality degrades. Hip restriction tightens. Every time. Every time. I ran the correlation 3 ways. It holds. Could it be the storage method? Temperature variance? Anticoagulant degradation? I checked. Your steward provided the storage protocols. They're standard. Nothing in the preparation process accounts for this. He turned from the graph and looked at her. His face was composed, the sovereign face. Say it clearly, Sylvie. Someone is putting something in your blood. The room changed. She felt it, a drop in the ambient pressure, the way a room feels when the largest predator in it stops pretending to be domestic. What score would you give this conversation? He asked. His voice was flat, controlled, the managed mode. Augustus, this isn't a what score? 2. This conversation is a 2. Agreed. Something in his jaw released. Blood poisoning, he said, in a king's personal supply. My supply is managed by 3 people. My steward, who has served my house for 200 years. My day attendant, who sources from the registered banks. And Dr. Vance, who oversees quality and composition. Vance, she said. Who referred you to me? Yes. Why would a physician poisoning his king send him to a specialist who might catch it? Because he assumed a mortal physical therapist would not. Augustus's voice was quiet, precise. The kind of quiet that carried more weight than volume. He sent me to you because he believed you were safe, that you would confirm his diagnosis of age-related degeneration and provide, he paused, credible mortal endorsement of his cover story. And instead, I've been tracking the thing that proves him wrong. Sylvie pulled a collection kit from a drawer. I need a sample of your regular blood supply, from the quart stores, sealed, unaltered. My hematologist can run a toxicology panel. You have a hematologist who runs vampire blood tox? Augustus, I specialize in vampire bodies. I have an entire professional network. I don't just wing it with resistance bands and yoga. Something happened in his face, a softening. The managed mode cracking open for half a second, showing the real underneath. And the real, right now, was looking at her with an expression she'd never seen on him before. Not the composed king. Not the earnest patient. Something raw. You found this, he said, in 12 sessions, from my movement patterns. From your hips, your hand, your shoulder, your gait, and your blood schedule. 90 years. Vance has monitored my health for 90 years. And I pay attention to how bodies move. She held the collection kit out to him. Yours told me. He took the kit, Their fingers touched, his cold, hers warm. She didn't flinch. She never flinched. 12 sessions of touching him, and she had never once reacted to the cold of his skin, the stillness of his pulseless wrist, the inhuman temperature of him. She just adjusted, adapted, put her warm hands on him and did her work. He held the contact for 1 second longer than the kit required. "I'll have the samples sent tonight," he said. "Good, and Augustus, stop drinking from the court supply. Use an independent bank. Direct. Tell no one at court why. You are giving a king medical orders. I'm giving a patient safety instructions. The king part is your problem." He almost smiled. The closest yet. She saw the architecture of it, the muscle engagement, the soft tissue response around his eyes and mouth. She knew, from professional study, exactly which muscles produced a smile. She had never wanted to see them activate so badly on anyone's face. "Thursday?" she said. "Thursday." He left. She stood in her treatment room, looking at the graph on the wall, and realized her hands were shaking. Not from fear, from the weight of what she'd just done, and from the weight of the moment when his fingers had stayed on hers, cold and steady, and she had not wanted to pull away. Her phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "This is Clement. His Majesty has asked me to convey that his progress today was, and I quote, above adequate. He does not know I am adding this. He has not used the word adequate as a positive descriptor in my 200 years of service. You have made an impression. Kindly do not tell him I sent this." She read it twice. Then she saved the number under Clement, anthropologist. Chapter 4. The Distance. The lab results came back in 4 days. Sylvie called Augustus directly. "Aconitum variatum," she said. "Wolfsbane derivative. Modified for vampire metabolism. Slow release, cumulative. Designed to degrade neuromuscular function over 6 to 8 months. You are reading this from a report? I'm reading it from my hematologist's analysis. The concentration in your stored blood is low enough to evade standard vampire screening. Vance's panels would never catch it, because they don't test for plant-derived compounds at this threshold. Because vampire physicians don't think in botanical terms. Because vampire physicians assume vampire problems have vampire causes. This is a mortal poison adapted for vampire biology. Whoever designed it knows both systems." She paused. "Augustus, the toxin signature, the specific compound, the delivery method, the dosage curve. It's consistent with someone who has advanced hematological training and pharmaceutical-grade botanical access. That's Vance. I can't prove it from the sample alone, but the profile fits. He has served my court for 90 years. He delivered the blood supply schedule to me personally every month. He monitored my health panels. He told me the tremor was age-related, and that the hip restriction was normal degeneration." Augustus's voice hadn't changed in pitch, but something in the texture of it had shifted, dense, compressed. "He sent me to you because he believed you would confirm his diagnosis. And I didn't. No, you did not." She heard nothing for 2 days. Then Clement called. "Vance has been placed under house arrest," Clement said, "pending formal tribunal." "Is Augustus safe? Is he off the contaminated supply?" "He's using an independent bank. The tremor is stabilizing." A pause, the careful kind. "However, Vance has allies on the council. 90 years of service generates loyalty. His arrest has created political turbulence." "Meaning?" "Meaning there are those who would prefer the accusation to disappear. And the simplest way to make it disappear is to discredit the source. Me." a mortal physical therapist who claims to have diagnosed a vampire blood poison through movement assessment. The council's phrase was, speculative methodology inconsistent with recognized hematological practice. They've asked Augustus to terminate your contract and submit to evaluation by a panel of vampire physicians. A panel who will run the same tests Vance ran and find the same nothing. Precisely. So they'll declare me wrong, Vance gets released, and the poisoning continues. You understand court politics very quickly for a mortal. I understand patterns, she said. That's literally my job. She gripped the phone harder. What did Augustus say? Clement was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was different, heavier, the 2 centuries of service audible in the words. His Majesty has made a decision. I am not in agreement with it. But I have served him for 200 years, and he has not asked my agreement. The text arrived that evening. Miss Hart, your services are no longer required. Effective immediately. Outstanding invoices will be settled by my office. I thank you for your diligence. A. Bellamy. No score. In 12 sessions, he had scored everything. Every interaction, every exchange, every moment. And the text that ended them had no number at all. She read it 7 times. Then she called him. No answer. Called again. No answer. Called Clement. Voicemail. She texted Clement. He's protecting me. Tell him I don't need protecting. Tell him I need to finish my work. Clement replied 40 minutes later. I have told him. He has responded with what I can only describe as a silence of historic magnitude. I am sorry, Sylvie. She drove to the residence. Security turned her away. She sat in her car outside the gate, engine running, thinking about his hands. The tremor getting worse. The fascial cascade that would start within weeks without intervention. The poison embedded in his soft tissue that no vampire physician would think to treat because they didn't treat soft tissue. She drove home. Her treatment room still had his file on the counter. The graph still taped to the wall. The spare t-shirt she'd started keeping for him folded by the treatment table. She picked up the t-shirt. It was cold. Everything he touched was cold, and it stayed cold longer than it should, as if his temperature persisted even in his absence. She called her friend Mara, who was a human-side GP, and who had been listening to Sylvie talk about her interesting vampire client for 6 weeks without comment. He fired me, Sylvie said. The king, the one you said had clinically significant hips. Don't use my words against me. You also said his almost smile was a diagnostic anomaly worth further observation. Mara. And that his hands were architecturally interesting from a joint mobility perspective. Those are legitimate clinical observations. Sylvie, in 15 years of friendship, you have never described a patient's smile. You have especially never described a patient's smile using the word anomaly as if it were a compliment. He doesn't smile. He almost smiles. There's a difference. I can hear you making the distinction. That's my point. Sylvie was quiet. Then, he's being poisoned, Mara. I found it. His court is trying to bury it. He fired me to protect me from them. And now he's going to deteriorate because no one else is treating the soft tissue damage. Can someone else treat him? No, vampire physicians don't do soft tissue. That's the whole reason he was referred to me. I'm the only person who looks at vampire bodies the way I do. So he fired the one person who can save him. Because he's a 500-year-old king whose solution to every problem is to make a unilateral decision and then stand very still while it plays out. That sounds like you've studied more than his hips. Mara, I'm just saying, you're not this angry about a patient. You're this angry about a person. The distinction landed like a diagnosis. She sat on the treatment table and didn't answer. Go get him, Mara said gently. He won't see me. You're a physical therapist who diagnosed a vampire assassination plot from a hip assessment. If anyone can get through a locked gate, it's you. That's not how gates work. That's not what I meant, and you know it. 3 weeks passed. She treated other clients. A young vampire with a shoulder impingement asked during a session, "Do you work with the Ashworth Court?" "I can't discuss other clients." "There are rumors about the king's physician." "I can't discuss that either." The young vampire was quiet for a moment, then, "My grandmother says a mortal diagnosed it, from movement assessment. She says it's the first time a human has done anything useful in vampire medicine in 300 years. Your grandmother sounds like a handful. She is 400 years old and has opinions about everything." "I know the type," Sylvie said, and adjusted his shoulder with slightly more force than was strictly necessary. Clement's journal, entry for week 2 of The Gap. Subject continues to practice the exercises in the East Wing each evening. I am documenting the decline. Week 1. Warrior 2 hold time dropped from 90 seconds to 50. Tree pose abandoned after 4 seconds. Subject said, "This is a temporary regression." Week 2. Warrior 2 hold time 23 seconds. Subject's left knee buckled during the lunge transition. He caught himself on the desk. He said nothing. He rolled up the mat and placed it in the corner of the room. He has not unrolled it since. I am noting this because in 12 sessions, the mat was the first thing he acknowledged upon entering the practitioner's clinic. He saluted it. He has now put it away. I do not have a score for this. Clement called on a Wednesday. His voice was tight. He collapsed this morning, in his study. He caught himself on the desk, but he could not stand unassisted. Her blood went cold. The cascade, the neuromuscular degradation. It's accelerating. The independent blood supply removed the new exposure, but 6 months of toxin is still in his tissue. Without your intervention, I told him 3 weeks ago. If he'd kept me on, I could have been managing the tissue load. 2 other practitioners were consulted. Neither had your baseline data. Neither could identify the cascade pattern without 12 sessions of longitudinal comparison. They recommended recalling you. Clement's voice broke, a hairline crack in 2 centuries of composure. He refused. Sylvie, he will not call you. He will not permit me to call you. I am calling you anyway. Where is he? East Wing, 2nd floor. I will leave the service entrance unlocked. Chapter 5. The Hands. She drove to the residence at 11 at night, parked at the service entrance, and walked through a door that Clement had left ajar. The hallway was dim, cool, and silent, in the particular way that a building full of vampires is silent. The absence of heartbeat, of breath, of the small, involuntary sounds that living things make. Clement met her at the top of the stairs. He looked, for the first time since she'd known him, old. Not vampire old. Worn. He will be angry, Clement said. Good. He may try to have you removed. He can try. She held up the bag she'd brought. Treatment supplies, resistance bands, her own hands. He's been without intervention for 3 weeks, and his neuromuscular function is cascading. Every day I'm not treating him is a day the damage gets harder to reverse. Clement studied her. Then he opened the door. Augustus was sitting in a chair by the window. Not his throne, not his desk. A simple chair, pulled to face the dark glass. He was wearing a white shirt, sleeves rolled to the elbows, and even from across the room she could see the tremor. Both hands now, the left worse than the right. He turned his head when the door opened, and she watched the sequence of expressions cross his face in the space of a second. Surprise, relief so sharp it looked like pain, and then the wall coming back down. Clement, he said, and his voice was rough. I gave a direct order. You did, my lord. Clement's voice was steady. I disobeyed it. I am prepared to accept the consequences. They cannot be worse than watching you die in a chair. I am not dying. You fell this morning, Sylvie said, stepping into the room. You can't hold a pen. Your left side is degrading faster than the right. And you've been without treatment for 3 weeks because you decided to protect me by firing me, which is the single stupidest clinical decision I've seen in 7 years of practice. And I once had a vampire client who tried to treat a broken femur with meditation. He stared at her. She stared back. You cannot be here, he said. And yet, she set her bag on the floor, pulled out a treatment mat, and unrolled it next to his chair. Get on the mat. I am the king. You are a patient in acute neuromuscular crisis who fired his only qualified specialist 3 weeks ago. Get on the mat. He didn't move. She could see the war in him. The king who commanded, the man who was failing, the creature who had pushed her away to keep her safe and was now faced with the consequence. Augustus, she said, and her voice dropped the clinical edge, just for a moment. Let me help you. He closed his eyes. The tremor in his hands was visible even in the low light. She watched his jaw work, a ghost memory of a clench, the involuntary muscular tell of a vampire in distress. He stood. It took him longer than it should have. He lowered himself to the mat, and the effort cost him. She could see it in the careful, controlled way he moved, each motion deliberate because automatic had stopped being reliable. She knelt beside him. I'm going to assess the damage first, she said, pulling on nitrile gloves out of habit, then removing them. She needed her hands for this, bare hands on cold skin. Tell me what you're feeling. I don't feel pain. That's not what I asked. Tell me what you're feeling. He was quiet. His eyes were on the ceiling. The tremor made his fingers tap against the mat in an uneven rhythm. Loss of control, he said finally. In the left hand first, then the grip, then the forearm. The hip gave out this morning, the left one, the one you were treating. Because the toxin had 6 months to embed in that tissue before I started working on it. She placed her hands on his left hip, pressing into the joint. She could feel it, the spasm, the rigidity, the fascial restriction that had rebuilt itself in 3 weeks without intervention. I'm going to mobilize this. It's going to be uncomfortable. I told you, I don't feel. She pressed. He made a sound. Not pain. Surprise. The kind of sound a body makes when it remembers it's being attended to. You were saying? She murmured. She worked for an hour, methodically, systematically, following the chain of compensation from his hip, through his spine, to his shoulder, to his hand. She could feel the toxin's signature in his tissue, the specific pattern of restriction it created, the way it locked down neuromuscular junctions in a cascade that mimicked aging but moved too fast, too asymmetrically, too targeted. The toxin is still metabolizing, she said, her hands on his left hip, pressing into the spasm. Your independent blood supply stopped the new exposure, but what's already in your tissue is still active. It's breaking down and redepositing. Can you treat it? I can manage the soft tissue effects, but the toxin itself needs to be metabolized out. You need clean blood, a lot of it, fresh, not stored. The independent bank supply is clean. Stored blood has reduced metabolic potency. Your body processes it slower. What you need is... She stopped. The clinical part of her brain finished the sentence before the rest of her caught up. Fresh, he said. He was looking at the ceiling. You mean living source blood? Yes. From a mortal. From a willing mortal donor. The metabolic compounds in fresh blood would accelerate toxin clearance by an order of magnitude. He was quiet. She could hear the silence of the room, the particular heavy silence that only existed around a creature that didn't breathe, didn't fidget, didn't make the small, involuntary sounds of life. "No," he said. "Augustus, I will not feed from a person. I have not done so in 300 years. The registered bank system exists specifically so that we do not have to." "You're dying." The word landed, not loud, just accurate. "The cascade is progressing. Your independent stored supply isn't metabolizing fast enough to clear the toxin. Without a fresh blood source, your motor function will continue to degrade. Within weeks, you won't be able to walk." "Then I will not walk." "Don't be a martyr about this." "I am not being a martyr. I am being," he struggled for the word, "principled." "Your principles are going to leave you paralyzed." She sat back on her heels. "I'm your PT. I'm also a registered voluntary donor. I've donated before. It's part of the professional certification for vampire-adjacent practitioners. I know the protocol." He turned his head and looked at her. The wall was down, and what she saw behind it was not exhaustion or pride or stubbornness. It was fear. Genuine, 5-century-old fear. "If I feed from you," he said, each word measured, "it changes something. Between us. It is not. It is not the same as stored blood. It is not clinical. I know what a fresh feed involves." "You know the theory. You do not know." He closed his eyes. The tremor in both hands was visible against the mat. "It is intimate. Profoundly. I would be aware of you in a way I cannot undo. Your heartbeat would not be background. It would be..." He stopped. "Mine," she said quietly. He opened his eyes. She saw the centuries in them, the weight of every feeding he'd ever shared, the reason he'd stopped, the cost of what she was asking him to allow. "I am asking you as your practitioner," she said, "and I am offering as..." She paused, chose her words. "As someone who is not going to sit here and watch you deteriorate when I can do something about it. Sylvie. Augustus. You are the most stubborn mortal I have encountered in 500 years. I've been told." The silence stretched. His jaw worked, the ghost memory clench, the involuntary tell. Then he extended his right hand. The tremor was visible, fine, continuous. "The wrist," he said, "not the throat. And you will tell me to stop if..." "I know the protocol." "Not the protocol. Me. You will tell me." She offered her wrist. He took it with both hands, cold fingers around warm skin, his grip careful, precise, the hands of a man who was acutely aware of the difference between his strength and hers. The absolute quiet of a room with a non-breathing creature. He lifted her wrist to his mouth. She felt his lips, cool, dry, against the pulse point. And then the bite. Sharp, brief, and immediately followed by something she had not expected: warmth. A spreading, bone-deep warmth that radiated from the point of contact, up through her arm and into her chest. Her heartbeat, which had been steady and fast, slowed, not painfully, like settling. He drank. Not long, seconds maybe. She watched his face change, the tension leaving the jaw, the temple, the tremor in his hands steadying, slowing, stopping. His body processing the fresh blood the way a dying engine processes clean fuel, immediately, gratefully, functionally. He released her wrist, pressed his thumb over the bite to seal it. His eyes were closed, and when he opened them, they were darker, the amber ring around the iris that she'd never noticed before now visible, a thin line of gold. "Your heartbeat," he said, and his voice was rougher than she'd ever heard it. 67 beats per minute, strong, slightly elevated. "I just donated blood to a vampire." Slightly elevated seems reasonable. He looked at her wrist, still held in his hands. The bite marks were already fading, the anticoagulant in his saliva accelerating the healing. "Thank you," he said. And the way he said it was not polished, not sovereign, not managed. It was the voice underneath all of that, the real one, the one she'd been catching in fragments for 12 sessions. It was simply, devastatingly sincere. "Same time Thursday," she whispered. He almost smiled. This time, it was close enough to count. She treated him through the rest of the night. The fresh blood accelerated everything. The fascial release responded faster, the spasm patterns broke more readily, his body remembering how to move correctly once the fuel was clean. At 4 a.m, she said, "Sit up." He sat up. It was easier than it had been 4 hours ago. Warrior 2. He looked at her. Now? Now, I need to see where we are. He stood. She could see the effort, but it was effort, not impossibility. He moved into the pose, left foot forward, arms extended, hips square. His left knee held. His right hand was steady. The tremor was there, faint, but the fine vibration had retreated from his fingers to a deeper place. "Hold it," she said. He held it. 10 seconds. 20. 30. 40. At 45 seconds, his left hip began to protest, but it didn't buckle. "Come out," she said. He came out of the pose and stood, breathing, mimicry, but the rhythm was steadier than it had been. 45 seconds, she said. 2 weeks ago it was 90. Before the cascade it was 23. She made a note on the back of a receipt from her treatment bag, which was the only paper she had. "You're recovering, the yoga tells me." "What score?" She looked at him, standing in his white shirt at 4 a.m, in a vast, cold room, having just been treated and fed and fought over and almost lost, asking her to rate his warrior 2. 5, she said. "But it's the best 5 I've ever given." "I will accept the 5, he said, under protest. "Noted." She pointed at the mat. "Lie back down. You're not done." By dawn, the left side tremor had reduced. The hip was mobile. The right hand was steadier than it had been in a month. He fell into stillness. Not sleep, vampires didn't sleep, but a state of absolute quiet that looked like rest. A surrender so complete that his body went silent in a way she'd never seen. She sat beside him on the mat, her wrist still tingling where he'd fed, and watched his face in the gray pre-dawn light. Clement appeared in the doorway at 6, carrying 2 cups, coffee for her, blood from the independent bank for Augustus. "He's resting," Sylvie said quietly. "He hasn't rested in 3 weeks." Clement set the coffee beside her. He looked at his king on the floor. The tremor? Stabilized. The fresh feed made the difference. His tissue is clearing the toxin. "You fed him," Clement said. Not a question. It was a clinical decision. Of course it was. He opened his notebook. Field observations, emergency session. Subject consented to treatment under protest. Practitioner restored neuromuscular function through sustained manual intervention and voluntary blood donation. At approximately 2 a.m., subject said, and I quote from the hallway, where I was absolutely not listening, "Your heartbeat, 67 beats per minute, strong, slightly elevated." The practitioner's response was medically accurate and emotionally understated. End observation. He closed the notebook. For posterity. She laughed. It was quiet and tired and real. "Clement, he needs to take the evidence to tribunal. The lab results, my movement data, the toxin pathway analysis, all of it. It will be more than enough, especially coming from a practitioner who returned to treat a patient who had dismissed her and who donated her own blood to save his life. That rather undermines the proximity-seeking mortal narrative." "You planned this." "I am an anthropologist, Sylvie. I observe. I do not plan." A pause. "But if I were to plan, I would note that a mortal who treats a vampire king through a poison crisis without payment, without security, and against direct orders is a mortal the tribunal cannot dismiss." Augustus stirred. His eyes opened, not gradually, but all at once. Thursday, he said. What? She leaned over him. You asked me at the end of every session, same time Thursday, 11 times. Then you stopped asking because I stopped coming. He turned his head to look at her. Thursday. Augustus, it's 6 in the morning. You just recovered from a neuromuscular cascade. Thursday, same time. Your clinic. I will be there, he paused. I will also bring my own athletic clothing. Clement has already procured it. I did, Clement confirmed. Under protest, but I did. And Augustus? She looked at him on the mat, in his white shirt, with his steadier hands and the amber ring still faintly visible in his eyes. No more firing me. Agreed. No more making unilateral decisions about my safety. I will attempt. No more attempting. You will not decide for me. My risk is mine. My professional judgment is mine. My choice to be here at 6 in the morning on your bedroom floor is mine. Are we clear? He looked at her for a long time. The managed mode was gone. The sovereign mask was gone. There was only the man, 5 centuries old, lying on a treatment mat, looking at the woman who had diagnosed his assassin, refused his dismissal, fed him from her own vein, and was now telling him firmly that she would not be managed. We are clear, he said. Good. She stood, extended her hand. He took it, cold fingers around warm, and she pulled him to standing. His grip was steady. His left hip bore weight without collapse. He was upright. He was whole. Because she had come when he told her not to. Your heartbeat, he said quietly. It has been 67 this entire conversation. That's my resting rate. I know. A pause. It is a good heart. That's... She stopped, swallowed. Thank you. Now drink your blood and eat something. Not me. Something from the fridge. There is no food in the fridge. I am a vampire. There's blood in the fridge. Drink it. Doctor's orders. You are not a doctor. I'm close enough. Thursday, Augustus. The tribunal took 2 weeks. Sylvie presented her evidence, the movement data, the feeding correlation, the lab analysis, the toxin pathway, to a room of vampires who looked at her the way one looks at a house cat that has solved a crossword puzzle. She presented it anyway, clearly, precisely, in the language of bodies and motion and the patterns that don't lie. Augustus sat through the proceedings without expression, but when the lead counselor suggested, delicately, that perhaps a human practitioner's methodology was insufficiently rigorous for a matter of this gravity, Augustus spoke. Miss Hart identified a targeted neurotoxin through biomechanical assessment, he said, his voice filling the chamber. She identified the delivery mechanism, the metabolic pathway, and the probable source. She did this in 12 sessions. Dr. Vance had 90 years and missed it. He paused. Or chose to miss it. The tribunal may decide which. Vance was convicted. The allies who'd threatened Sylvie were formally censured. And in the records of the Ashworth court, a mortal physical therapist's testimony was entered as evidence for the first time in the court's 4-century history. Afterward, in the corridor, Sylvie asked Clement the question that had been sitting in her chest for weeks. Why did he do it? 90 years. Why now? Clement was quiet for a few steps. Vance testified that he had served 3 kings before Augustus. Each reigned between 60 and 100 years. Augustus has held the throne for 463. Vance believed the court had calcified, that no new policy, no reform, no succession of ideas was possible as long as one man held power indefinitely. He paused. He was not trying to kill the king. He was trying to force a retirement. Gradual incapacitation until the court had no choice but to install a successor. He was making the decision for him, Sylvie said. Yes. He believed he was acting in the court's long-term interest. He said so at tribunal. Calmly, with 90 years of institutional knowledge behind every word. Clement's voice was dry, careful. It was the most coherent act of treason I have witnessed. And Augustus? Augustus listened to every word. Then he said, "You could have asked me to step down." And Vance said, "I did, in 1987. You said no." The king had no memory of the conversation. Vance had been waiting 39 years. Sylvie stopped walking. The weight of it, the patience, the grievance calcifying across decades, the physician who watched his king every month and chose, somewhere in the quiet of those 90 years, that care and poison were the same thing, settled over her like cold air. "That's a 9, she said quietly. "I beg your pardon?" "On the horror scale, that's a 9. Thursday, 10 in the morning, the waiting room of Heart Integrative Therapy. Augustus sat on the right side, in the UV filtered zone, in simple black athletic pants and a soft gray t-shirt. He wore his signet ring. He held no referral slip. Clement sat beside him, notebook open, pen poised. "Session 13, he wrote. "Post-tribunal. The tremor has stabilized at a functional level. The hip is within normal range. The subject arrived 14 minutes early, which is unprecedented. He is wearing the athletic clothing without being asked, which I am noting as a developmental milestone of historic significance." "Clement." "My lord? If you are writing about me, I would like to know." "I am writing about the general phenomenon of rehabilitation," Clement said smoothly. "You are merely a case study." The treatment room door opened. Sylvie stood there in her gray top and her practical ponytail and her expression of total professional competence. "Augustus," she said. "Ready?" He stood. He walked toward her, his gait even, his posture open, his left hip rotating as it should. "I have been practicing," he said. "Practicing what?" "The formation. Warrior 2. It's called Warrior 2. I held it for 3 minutes yesterday. Clement timed it." "It's true," Clement called from the waiting room. "I have it logged." Sylvie looked at Augustus. He looked at her. The almost smile was there, closer than it had ever been to the real thing. 3 minutes is good, she said. "Is it excellent?" "It's very good." "You said excellent during session 5. My threshold has been established. I require the same standard." She stepped back to let him into the treatment room. He paused at the counter, took off his signet ring, and placed it beside the treatment table. Then, very quietly, so only she could hear, "I will return shortly." She watched him say it to the ring. He said it without embarrassment, without self-consciousness. The way you say something that is simply true and simply necessary. On the windowsill, the ficus had new growth. A single green shoot, pale and unlikely, reaching toward the UV-filtered light. "I told it you were coming back," she said. "You told the ficus about me?" "I tell the ficus about all my interesting cases." She paused. "You're the only one it grew for." He looked at the ficus. He looked at her. The almost smile crossed over into something real, small, unpracticed, like a muscle that hadn't been used in centuries finally remembering its function. She stepped toward him and pressed his left shoulder down, gently, 1 inch, the gesture that had started as a correction and become something else entirely. "What score," he said, his voice low, "would you give this moment?" She left her hand on his shoulder, cold skin under warm palm. The temperature contrast that had been a clinical observation 12 sessions ago and was now the only thing she could feel. "I don't have a number for this," she said. He covered her hand with his, cold fingers over warm. "Nor do I," he said. "And I have rated everything for 463 years." In the waiting room, Clement's pen moved across the page. Subject smiled. Duration, approximately 4 seconds. Unscored. Recommend continued observation indefinitely.